Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, a done deal. Elon Musk buys Twitter for $44 billion. Amazon suffers its first quarterly loss in 7 years. And the U.S. economy for the last quarter shrank 1.4%. If we have another one, are we headed into a recession? We'll have that and more. That tonight on this Friday, April the 29th, 2022. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up on this Friday, April the 29th, 2022. I hope your week went well. Well, the U.S. economy shrank 1.4% for the last quarter. Now, why is that so important? Because the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Now, we'll be watching if by this summer, the next second quarter ends negatively. Now, why did the majors all drop this week and this month as well? Well, 3 major reasons. The Federal Reserve waited way too long in raising interest rates to battle inflation that we now have because of the low rates. Second, Ukraine's crisis is threatening the European economy. And third, China's lockdown is threatening many U.S. manufacturing plants located inside China. I'd hope companies would learn about putting all their eggs in one basket and not locating all their manufacturing in China. But I doubt it. Well, coming up tonight, we'll be talking with the former CEO and president of McDonald's, Ed Rensi. As the CEO of McDonald's, Ed enhanced the McDonald's breakfast menu. He developed the Chicken McNuggets in 1983. He started the Ronald McDonald House to help families with children having cancer. And he brought in menu items aimed at healthy eating. Ed Rensi coming up in just a moment. But first, how did the markets do this week? It wasn't very good. All the indexes closed down for the week, and the month of April, it was NASDAQ's worst week since October of 2008. Well, this week, the Dow Jones ended at 32,978, and that was down almost 2.5% for the week. The S&P 500, they closed at 4,131, and that was down 3.25% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 12,334, and that was down almost just 4% for the week, 3.9%. Well, let's get to our guest tonight. Ed Rensi started off at McDonald's. He was working behind the grill in 1966 and ended as CEO and president for 14 years at McDonald's, where during his leadership, he more than doubled the numbers of restaurants. Most importantly, he doubled sales to more than $16 billion annually worldwide. And best of all, Ed is with us tonight. Hi, Ed. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Glad to be here. I'm glad we could have a conversation today.
Oh, thanks so much. Me too. Ed, so far, of all the companies that have been reporting first quarter results, from what I understand, about 80% of them have been beating estimated earnings. How do you think the economy is doing so far?
Well, I worry about it a little bit because I wonder how much substance is really behind the economy that's going to be enduring, as opposed to the government just pushing a lot of cash into the marketplace. Mm-hmm. I know people that haven't worked for 2 years that are living high on the hog at home, working from home a little bit. That stuff's going to come crashing down around our ears one of these days, and you can see it in the inflation numbers. My goodness gracious, I look at restaurants today, and year over year, for the last 2 years, they're up about 15, 16% in prices. One of these days, they're going to hit a wall of price resistance, and customers are going to start slowing down their visitation, or they're going to have to go back to work, and they won't be as available in the marketplace. So,
hey, that's a good point, because when we talked last time, the government was still sending out more federal unemployment checks. Well, that stopped as of last Labor Day. But I've talked to a number of employers who are still looking for workers. Where did the workers go?
Well, there's a couple things going on. You know, the baby boomers and their first children are starting to retire in record numbers. We're having a fall off of a cliff retirement here in Sarasota, Florida, where I live. There's 80 people a day moving into Florida. Mm-hmm. And most of them are retirees from the upper Midwest and the East Coast, and they got very nice retirement plans. the housing is going up, 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 and then all of a sudden, the price per square foot in Sarasota has flattened off and declined a little bit, which means the housing market is starting to shrink a bit. There's not as much availability. So where are the workers? We got 12 million posted jobs right now that nobody's taking. Restaurants are running about 20 people short across the board. Fast food, quick service, fine dining, whatever it is. I was with a McDonald's franchisee the other day. He's paying $16 an hour to get people. Now he's staffing his stores beautifully. He's doing well, but he had to raise his prices to cover the cost. Yeah. California's got this ridiculous 32-hour work week coming up, which means you're going to get paid time and a half for hour number 33. So for a 17-year-old kid in California working at Starbucks, making $16 an hour, all of a sudden they're going to be making $24 to pour a cup of coffee. That's just not sustainable, and we still can't recruit people. We got more jobs than people, clearly.
This inflation eventually, I'm assuming, will subside. But when it comes to the prices, I mean, whether you're talking, you think about McDonald's, whether you're looking at a McDonald's in New York, New Orleans, Chicago, Illinois, West Coast, I mean, will the prices subside for those meals as well? Or once you hit those type of prices, they're not going to go down? Because just as you mentioned, when you're paying somebody $16 an hour, you can't go back and go, okay, now we're going to pay you $15.50 or $14.
Well, the reality of it, restaurants basically have about 10% profit, 30% labor cost all in, 30% occupancy cost, and 30% food cost. That's just roughly the formula. Mm-hmm. Commodity prices are going up like crazy. Just diesel fuel alone for tractor trailers, a truckload of produce leaving California to Manhattan, if it's nonstop, 3-4 years ago was about $4,300 to $4,500 for that run. Today it's over $9,000. It's a 123% increase in that freight just because of fuel. So what is going to happen to the prices? They're going to stay in place because other costs are galloping up. And, you know, what's going to really happen is you're going to start to see menu adjustments where smaller portions, less premium products on the menu. We're going to go from Wagyu steak to just plain old choice steak, maybe sous vide to get over the hump of quality. But you're going to see these restaurateurs adjust where they have to adjust to maintain those prices because they just can't afford to go down. Occupancy costs is up. You look at public utilities are going up. Taxes, my goodness gracious, taxes at every level are going crazy right now.
It's interesting you bring up about taxes because Milton Friedman always had a saying. He said, when it comes to inflation, inflation is taxation without legislation. And it's the little secret that a lot of legislators don't mind because they don't have to be on record voting for it, but they are. The federal coffers are having income coming in because of higher tax rates because of inflation is taxed on a percentage of sales. When sales are up because of inflation, they get more money that way.
If you're in the franchising business, when those franchisees raise their prices, the royalty automatically goes up. So you start to see earnings in these public franchise companies that aren't really based on growth in the business.
Next month, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates not 0.25%, but probably 0.5%, 50 basis points. Do you think that they can be adding interest rates so much that may cause a recession?
Well, there are people that say the only way to stop inflation is to have the interest rates exceed the inflation rate.
Yeah,
and if you go back to mid-1980s when we changed the consumer price index formula and went away from housing as part of that formula and went to rent-based housing as opposed to purchase housing, that knocked a bunch of the cost out of the equation. If you went back to the 1987 formula with today's numbers, you'd be over 15%. There's just no way for the Fed to increase interest rates that fast. But they're trying to get to 3.5, 4, I understand, by the end of the year. That will be crippling in and of itself to the housing market.
I would imagine, let's say if you've got a franchisee that has a restaurant in New York, one in the Midwest, and also one on the West Coast. Well, you need lettuce and tomatoes. Well, your lettuce and tomatoes are coming from probably more of the West Coast. So would the cost of transportation be less getting lettuce and tomatoes and other items, say, in that area than in New York? So that franchisee in New York or New Orleans or Chicago would have to pay more for it?
No, not really, because different commodities are grown in different regions of the United States and it moves around a lot. So when one thing goes down, the next thing goes up. There's a lot of cattle in Florida that people don't realize is here. It's got the largest single herd of any state in the union, mostly dairy cattle. Dairy cattle is a substance, particularly dairy steers, for a lot of fast food restaurants and quick service restaurants for their lean product and their meat. And the other thing is California production is way down. When they shut down all the water in California and can't irrigate, I have a friend of mine that's got grape vineyards out there north of Sacramento, and he's only allowed to take water out of the Sacramento River for 3 hours to water his vineyard. And potatoes are something that has a lot of freight costs because they're heavy, they're mostly water. So commodities really don't get impacted by where they're grown. You know, New Jersey's got the best tomatoes in the world, but that's not where restaurants get their tomatoes because those premium tomatoes are sold in grocery stores, not in restaurants.
Well, Ed, what about, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, like your potatoes, like McDonald's potatoes, J.R. Simplot used to had the contract. I mean, from what I understand, I think what back from when Ray Kroc was running things and such. I mean, I don't even know, is his family now still involved with that? Do they come from Idaho? And from there's distribution plants that go from to the west of California or to the east of New York.
And J.R. Simplot still exists. His daughter, I think, is running the company today because J.R. passed away. But he has unit trains. McDonald's French fries are processed there. They're loaded onto a train and they're moved across the United States to different distribution points. And Lamb Weston's a big producer of potatoes as well.
The National Labor Relations Board is now working with a lot of the unions, especially for franchises. And offhand, I'm thinking of Starbucks. But I mean, you've also got Amazon, which is not franchise. Do you see possibilities that unions and the NLRB is going to be going into locations like McDonald's or fast food franchisees to try to unionize certain locations, like they're doing with Starbucks?
Well, when you look at Starbucks, the answer to that question is yes, because union membership has been falling for years. If you look at the automobile industry, look at Lordstown plant, General Motors in the Cleveland, Ohio area. That plant has shifted dramatically away from labor to robots. In fact, the teachers' unions were started by UAW membership because they needed dues-paying people to keep their income coming. So I do think that the Labor Relations Board under the Biden administration is far more favorable to unions than they were under Trump or Clinton, even for that matter. Labor unions today cannot give the employee benefits like they used to. My family grew up in the steel and coal mines of eastern Ohio. Worker safety was paramount. Health and welfare was paramount. Those mines were dangerous. My family were in those coal mines, underground mines. They were dangerous places. And the unions went in there and really focused on safety and health and welfare for those guys working in those mines with coal dust and everything else. That's what unions ought to be focused on, to discuss with management worker safety, opportunities, and not political campaigns. So much of union money is paid off to people in state and federal legislation to get favorable legislation to make it easier to organize so they can get even more dues money.
Well, I think this week, in fact, I think it was Brian Nicole, who's the CEO of Chipotle, was saying that he doesn't have the fear of the unionizing as much as, say, Howard Schultz of Starbucks does, because they own most of their stores. They're not franchised.
The answer to that question is there is a dramatic difference. Starbucks is 100% company owned, so you organize one store, now you got a pathway to organize all of them. Mm-hmm. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's are highly franchised. In fact, McDonald's has very few company stores as a percentage. And those franchisees treat their employees like their family. They have tuition aid programs. They elevate people of color to really important management positions. In fact, when I was at McDonald's, our number one source for minority franchisees was company employees who are outstanding. It was a goal of theirs to become franchisees. Ricky Wade over in the Fort Lauderdale area was a company employee. He's got 30 plus restaurants now. He's a wonderful businessman. He treats his employees as if they're family. No union is going to stand a chance organizing that store because of who he is and how he operates. And that's true of 90% of the franchisees.
We're talking, if you're just joining us, we're so happy to have Ed Renzi, former CEO of McDonald's. Don't go away. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're talking with Ed Renzi, former CEO of McDonald's, talking about a number of different things. Ed, before we left for the break, we were talking about the National Labor Relations Board. We're talking about unionization and such. And what interested me was that you're on a board today, and I don't know if this was when you were the CEO too, but CEOs have been coming under fire lately. The average person will never know what it's like usually working for a Fortune 500 company, more or less working in the executive areas, departments. But when you have somebody from CNBC or a business news network calling you about something that happened with a Florida law or something that may be a Georgia voting law, what type of board are you now are on that are helping with CEOs?
Well, I'm the chairman of an organization called Boardroom Initiatives, and it's made up of a coalition of Jobs Creators Network, which was founded by Bernie Marcus of Home Depot. Andy Pusner has a group called Second Vote, and Mr. Solomon runs an organization called Free Enterprise Project. And we've all gotten together under some pretty good leadership and started talking about the role the CEOs play and boards play in building shareholder value, and the fact that we're going off the deep end in a lot of companies over this wokeness, and we're starting to spend shareholder money for a minority of employees to the detriment of the other employees in the company. And all we're suggesting to these boards, and at annual meeting, we actually had an annual meeting, Bank of America did, and we put together a shareholders proposal asking them to conduct a civil rights audit as they adopt these kinds of things to make sure that everyone understands the financial impact to existing employees and, more importantly, the shareholders. Boards of directors and the employees, the CEO and his executive staff, have one duty and one duty only, and that duty is to the shareholder. Their responsibility is to grow the business intelligently, increase profits and dividends for the benefit of the shareholder. They're taking shareholder money and saying, we are going to husband that money to make you more secure in your life and for your future. I had lunch one time with Milton Friedman in San Diego, and I was pretty young back then. I was 40. I'm now 78. And he said, young man, the province of boards of directors and CEOs and executives is only to build shareholder profit and income. And if they get that, you return that to them in the form of dividends and additional stock, and you don't get to decide how they spend their money. So when you start spending money for things inside the company on social policy, social engineering, political policy, or political engineering, you're making a decision to spend money in areas that they may not agree with, and you don't have the right to do that. Ed, so the boardroom initiative is to help boards understand, and frankly, I hope we give some of them some cover, because I know a lot of boards would prefer not to be doing some of the things they're doing, but they get so much pressure and so much bullying from different segments of our society, they feel obligated to do these things, and they shouldn't feel obligated.
True. Ed, what about, I mean, today, and there's a thought that a lot of the individuals own all the stock. Individuals are the stockholders around the United States or the world. But you've got institutions, and offhand, I'm thinking of an institution like BlackRock or Vanguard or
Sure.
State Street. Well, BlackRock is run by a CEO named Larry Fink. And Larry puts out his annual letter. And when he calls a CEO, because his company owns a lot of their shares, that they take that phone call. Do you think
Sure.
that sometimes people like Larry Fink or others are overstepping their boundaries in imposing their political views on the CEOs and the exec and the boardrooms like you're talking about?
Well, I won't speak for Larry Fink. He has to speak for himself. And he doesn't. His firm, they manage $10 trillion worth of stock for individuals who have invested that. Those people have 401ks, they have retirement programs, and it's not their stock. It belongs to the people that invested and gave it to them to manage. Larry can say whatever he wants to say. It's a free country, but the reality of it is his obligation is to the people that he's husbanding their money for retirement. And with inflation right now, and some of these missteps that are being made, people on fixed income are going to get hurt. So, in my opinion, BlackRock ought to keep their opinions to themselves as an organization. Now, the individual, if they want to take their own personal money and go out and spend it that way, I'm all for it. You know, I'm going to back my political friends, and I'm going to have a point of view, and I want a voice. I get that. I'm all for that. I think we have freedom of speech in this country, and we ought to recognize how valuable that is. But this business about the tyranny of the minority, you know, just take Disney, for example. They just had a big dust up down here in Florida. They got about 70,000 employees. 70 of them walked off the job in protest of the parents' rights bill that had to do with sex education for children that aren't mature enough to understand what was being taught to them. The CEO of the company came out as a result of that walkout and said, we're going to spend all our time, effort, and energy getting that bill overthrown. Well, that's not his job. Mm-hmm. The state legislature was elected by the citizens of Florida. And boy, this thing has blown up in their face like crazy. I feel bad for Disney. I think it's a great company. Mm-hmm. It's a good company, but they lost a lot of value because of that. There's another thing that happened. I've talked, this neighborhood I live in has got a lot of parents and grandparents. They're scared to death that there's something going on to Disney they don't understand. I don't believe it, but they don't understand it. And they're saying, I'm not sure I want to go there. Now, I think I'm going to go to Universal Studios. That's crippling when you get that kind of an attitude about an institution as wonderful as Disney is.
And it also is important. I think the way it sounded to me is like Bob Chapek, the CEO of Disney, originally wanted to stay out of the fray. He did not want to get into politics. But I think there was also, in addition to like what you were saying, some of the employees started picketing. The former CEO, Bob Iger, he sent out a tweet in endorsing what the employees were going to do, and which all of a sudden, normally a CEO who retires steps back and lets the new CEO take over. But by him kind of stirring up the pot, it created more of a problem for Chapek. Well, let me ask you this, Ed, do you think that now CEOs are going to think twice, because you've got Ron DeSantis, who's the governor in Florida right now. They're not going to take this lying down. And just like Georgia's voting law of a year or so ago, Governor Kemp, he's not taking it lying down. I think a lot of CEOs were thinking, well, we'll side with the group that is the most vocal, that's the most problematic. But now, since the other side is not going to take this lying down, do you think CEOs are going to be very cautious now before making political opinions?
Well, this may be the worst period in Disney's history, but it could be great for other American businesses to realize what the consequences of these kinds of decisions are. And the day I left McDonald's, I swore that I would not get involved in any way, shape, or form. It is not my province to second guess existing management. By the way, I think they're doing an outstanding job, so it's easy to stay away. But the fact of the matter is, Iger and BlackRock own almost 15% of Disney stock. When they call the CEO up, either directly or indirectly, he's going to pay attention because he's just getting started. They should have been supporting him, not criticizing him.
I hope you come back, my friend.
Anytime you want me, I'll be there for you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we want to hear from you. Make it concise and write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. And now for a look ahead for the earnings and market information for next week. But first, what Internet information system was launched today on this day in 1989? We'll have that answer in just a moment. Well, what Internet information system was launched on this day in 1989? The World Wide Web. The WWW began in public domain linking hypertext documents to the Internet and was invented by Tim Berners-Lee. And it all began 33 years ago today. Well, finally, would you like to live like Warren Buffett? Well, now you can. The home where Warren Buffett started his business career in 1956 is now for sale at $799,000. Now, if you'd like to have lunch with Warren Buffett, that's going for about $1.4 million. So a house for almost half the price of a lunch, well, that seems like a steal. It's a 3-bedroom, 4-bathroom home that in 1956 he and his wife Susie lived with two of their 3 children when he decided to get a group of family and friends together to start an investment business. And, well, the rest is history. In fact, this weekend in Omaha is the annual Berkshire Hathaway stockholders meeting. It's like the New Orleans Jazz Fest without the jazz, or Woodstock without the pot. Well, what they do have is lots of investors of Berkshire, many who have been with Warren since the 1960s, to hear his views on the market. Well, but Warren's first home could be yours for just under $800,000. Now, coming up in May, we've got some great guests for you that you will not want to miss. Next month, we're going to be talking stocks, with the market dropping this month, and how will the market be looking ahead with Mark Mahaney. Now, Mark is, in addition to being a senior managing director at Evercore Financial, he's also a contributor at CNBC. Mark has covered internet stocks for over 25 years. In fact, Institutional Investor has, for the last 15 years, ranked Mark as one of the top 3 analysts for the internet. How long will the market be dropping? Well, Mark Mahaney will be coming up in May. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be discussing the market with former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Harvey Pitt. We'll be talking with Harvey about Elon Musk's running battles with the SEC, insider trading fraud, the markets, and so much more with the former SEC chairman, Harvey Pitt. Which brings me to talking about ethics. Coming up next week, we'll be talking with the former CEO and chairman of Medtronic, Bill George. Bill is now a professor at Harvard Business School, where he teaches business ethics. CEOs are under fire to conform to political causes. Twitter's board of directors fought Elon Musk with poison pills to prevent him from buying Twitter, and so much more. That's next week with Harvard business professor Bill George. And as a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that is our show for this Friday, April the 29th, 2022. Hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to Ed Resney for joining us this evening, but as always, it's you. We appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all the social medias. So enjoy your weekend ahead. Have a great, productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.